Hello friends, so today's video is going to be a non-spoiler book review for Ruination by Anthony Reynolds. I'm going to break this review up into several different parts. I'll have timestamps down below if you'd like to skip to any one particular section. The first section I'm going to start with is one I don't usually include in a book review, but I think is important in this one, and that would be helpful things to know. This will be followed by the synopsis, and then we'll be getting into characters, tropes, themes, and pacing, and at the very end we'll discuss whether or not this is a book for you. Jumping into it and starting with the helpful things to know, this takes place within the same world as the League of Legends video game and the Arcane TV show. And I know a question a lot of people might have is, do I have to have played the game? Do I have to have watched the show? And the answer is no. That said, I think if you are a fan of the game, this acts as a backstory for some of the characters, and therefore you're going to likely know where things are going to end up. However, I would think that wouldn't really bother a whole lot of people. I haven't played League of Legends, but I had a similar experience when I read the Witcher books. Technically, the Witcher books actually came before the video game, or video games, because there's several, but like a lot of people, I came into Witcher through the video games, and therefore when I picked up the books, because chronologically they take place first, it felt like I was getting the backstory to all the characters, and I really liked it. And so I think that if you have that with Witcher, you're gonna feel that with this as well. Plus, as just somebody who loves fantasy of all kinds, I had a lot of fun with this book. I thought it was a solid standalone. It's going to move rather quickly. It's not going to require a ton of your attention. It's not a very demanding story. It sort of feels nostalgic in a lot of ways. Since I'm being a little unconventional with this review and talking about some things that normally wouldn't come into play, I wanted to mention the presentation as well as the audiobook. So if you are somebody who enjoys audiobooks, you'll likely be happy to know that this has a huge cast of narrators. So that was really cool. And then when it comes to the presentation, I really liked the imagery here, which does make more sense once you've read the book. But then on top of that, there is artwork on the sleeve, which I really like. So on the inside of the sleeve, you will get this amazing artwork of some of our characters. And then on the note of character art, before I get into that, I actually like the naked hardback quite a bit. And then in the back of the book, you're going to get artwork of your characters, and a lot of art, and it's fantastic art. So I think that the effort that was put into the presentation, into the audiobook, I wanted to make note of that just because I know it's something that is going to enhance the overall experience for a lot of people. Finally now though, switching into the synopsis and what the book is about. So we follow a young woman named Callista. She is a very well-respected soldier within their military. She's one of the leaders of the military. She's actually also a noble, but she has no interest in playing the game of politics. She wants nothing to do with that kind of power. It does not appeal to her whatsoever. However, she cannot really stay away from that sphere of influence because her uncle is actually now the king. He is an untested king, and he is a very young king. He wasn't really the person that was in line for the throne necessarily, or the one that anybody really expected to ever become king, but he has a reputation to try and live up to because his father was a very well-respected king. And so now this king named Viego feels the need to prove himself. Callista is trying to hold him in check, but there's so many other individuals that have a lot of sway over Viego, and the person that she is the most relieved to see has the biggest sway would be Viego's wife, Isolde. However, sadly, something happens to Isolde that now leads Viego to really want to do anything possible to save her and to do what he can to make sure that she is safe. And the only person that he trusts to try and go on this mission, this impossible quest, is Callista. While Callista is our main character, we do get introduced to a lot of side characters. All of them felt very notable. This is one of the few connections I would say that this has to Arcane. It's not a direct thing. It's not something that you need previous knowledge of, but something that Arcane did really well is it had so many characters and they were all distinct. You cared for so many of them. You understood why they were doing what they were doing, but you also could see how what they were doing interfered with what another character was doing, and it made it hard to determine who you were rooting for. And with Callista, you do want to see her be successful because she is one of the only people that wants Camivor, which is their country, to try and be a more peaceful country. They are known for conquering other peoples, and this is a somewhat unpopular opinion. A lot of Viego's advisors do not really want this, and so she's sort of the only one that's trying to do this. So you really root for her because you know that she is probably the best thing for this country. However, some of the actions that she is taking on behalf of Viego, some of the ways in which she's so loyal to him, it does mean that she makes certain decisions that you're like, that's probably not the best thing to do. And so it has some moral grayness to it. And then you have other characters who are definitely very villainous, but this kind of ties into some of the tropes I wanted to discuss. The ways in which this story, and Arcane as well, something they did really well was they showed how your circumstances and the people you're surrounded by, it's almost like there's an inevitability to the path you're on. It's almost like you're on this road and there's really no way to get off of it. And so you see that with some of the villainous characters. You see that with some of the characters who, at first, you understand where they're coming from, and then you can kind of start to see where they're going off the rails, but you don't really think that there's anything that's going to get them back on track. Adding to that, I think that this is definitely influenced not just by the characters who they're surrounded by, but the trauma that they have gone through, and then the mental health, the things that they are experiencing having an effect on them. And when there's no one or nothing to help them get better, you definitely see that in this. It's not touched on nearly as heavily as something like the Stormlight Archive. It's not like we dive really deep into trauma and mental health, but you do see glimpses of, okay, well, this is a traumatic thing, and this person, they're not processing it very well, and what they're doing as a result is having a negative effect on others, especially when these are people who hold a lot of power. So it's like they can't afford to make mistakes. They can't afford to have this time where they are trying to be better again, because in that time where they're not better, in that time where their decision making is compromised, it's going to affect hundreds, if not thousands of people. Adding to this, we also see the repercussions of violence. So there's a great moment where Callista, she really wants to have aid. She's seeking aid from a certain group of people, but the way that they react to her and their response to her is very much rooted in the fact that she comes from Camivor, that she comes from a place that is known for conquering, and she thinks to herself, if we had a different reputation, maybe things would turn out differently. But it's almost like the sins of the past are affecting their future. And I think that is also quite powerful. It's, again, not dived into exceptionally deep or anything, but it's there and it's present. And I wanted to also read a really quick quote that I think highlights how you really don't always attain glory, you don't attain power, you don't attain respect when you're constantly conquering. Maybe at the time you feel powerful, at the time you feel like we have everything, but there's a really great quote where Callista is thinking, how long has our noble questing culture been corrupted? How long did it take for our quest to become little more than convenient and transparent excuses to plunder and raid, to kill, claim fertile lands, and steal from our neighbors? How long before they were used to justify invading any city, state, and nation that would add wealth and esteem to the kingdom of Camivor? So those are some of the heavier, deeper aspects of the story. I do think that this book is a little bit more on the fun, adventurous side than perhaps some of those things I've mentioned would make it seem. So there's definitely the trope of the magical city and the mystical city. There's also the quest storyline, the adventure storyline, this impossible quest. And I think there's also a little bit of the magical artifact, the wondering if this thing is indeed real, and if it is real, is it going to work the way we think it's going to work? So there's the mysterious, fantastical, mythical objects and places, and that is where I think the tone of the story really comes into play, because I do want to reiterate, as much as I really liked the mental health and trauma and the consequences and repercussions of conquering and violence and things like that. As much as I liked that we had those tidbits in the story, I do think it is more on the fun side, and it's because of these other particular tropes that we have. As for the pacing, I always found I was intrigued about what would happen next. I was engaged in Callista's story and her relationship with Viego. They actually are more like brother and sister than they are like uncle and niece. And so their relationship was interesting to me. Her relationship with some side characters I really enjoyed. I liked seeing the progression of that. And then this quest that Callista eventually goes on to try and help save Viego's wife. I was wondering, is she going to be successful? And I have a feeling, I mean, is this going to go in a negative direction? Is this going to get a lot darker than I'm expecting? There's also that general feeling of this might seem like it is this utopia, this perfect thing that she's trying to get to, but it just seems like there's going to be something darker and sinister if she really gets there. So the pacing was great because I was always kind of wondering what was going to happen next. Some of what ended up happening actually quite surprised me, and that made the payoff very nice as well, because I was a little worried that as I was progressing, there were certain things that I thought seemed fairly predictable and they were starting to come to be, and I was like, yeah, that's kind of what I thought it would be. But I do think that the ending kind of took me off guard. Whether it was sad or happy or triumphant or anything like that, I don't really want to say because I think that's somewhat spoilery, but I will just say that I liked where things left off. It wasn't quite what I was anticipating. So overall, is this a book for you? If you're looking for a fun, nostalgic feeling fantasy story, I would say give it a go. If you are somebody who you like the idea of a lot of the themes that I mentioned, but you also really like when you dive really deep and there's a ton of depth to them, there really isn't as much as maybe you would like, so it's just going to be somewhat surface level. I would say this book is a lot more plot driven than character driven. I tend to be somebody who's very character driven. I actually think I could have had characters interact even more. I would have liked, I mean, this could have been a duology if they'd wanted it to be, where I could have really felt more for certain, especially certain character relationships in the story. So I think that if we'd had more time, it would have been more to my taste. However, I don't think it really needed more time. I think it's just fine standing as a standalone, and it was a good time. It was adventurous, it was fun. It had some of those heavier moments, but it never really stopped. So it's fast-paced, it's got some cool action, it's got cool magic, the tropes are fun, it's got the nostalgic feeling. It's just not going to be the absolute most original thing you've seen. It's not going to have the most depth, it's not particularly character-driven, and I think you're going to end up wanting more elaboration if you are somebody that tends to enjoy that. If you've picked this up, definitely feel free to let me know your thoughts. Let me know if you're planning to pick it up. But anyway, thanks so much for watching. I hope you have a fantastic rest of your day, and I'll see you all later. Bye.